They were the couple everyone admired, flawless, glamorous, seemingly untouchable. A picture-perfect love story played out in front of millions, their lives an endless reel of luxury, passion, and devotion. From the outside, they had it all: wealth, beauty, and a bond that seemed unbreakable. But behind the glitz and perfectly curated moments was something far more sinister. No one could have predicted how it would all come crashing down. A single message. A moment of misplaced laughter. A night that should have been the beginning of forever, instead became the setting for an unthinkable crime. The world had watched their fairy tale unfold. They had cheered for their love, swooned at their wedding, and dreamed of having a romance just like theirs. But no one knew the darkness lurking beneath the surface. No one saw the jealousy tightening its grip, the obsession festering just beneath the smiles. What could drive a man to destroy the woman he claimed to love? What happened behind those closed doors that turned passion into bloodshed? This is the chilling story of how a dream became a nightmare, of how love, when twisted by control and rage, can lead to something far more terrifying than heartbreak. Before we dive into this shocking case, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more tales of love, lies, and betrayal. Now, let's begin. From the outside, 26-year-old Zahara Monet-Alexander had it all. She was young, beautiful, and draped in luxury, a socialite whose every move was followed by millions. Her life was a series of extravagant vacations, designer shopping sprees, and VIP parties with the elite. Born into privilege, she was the daughter of an R&B singer whose voice once ruled the charts and a high-powered Atlanta attorney who made sure his little girl never wanted for anything. Zahara wasn't just another influencer, she was a brand, a symbol of wealth and perfection. Her fans worshipped her, calling her the embodiment of real love and loyalty. She made them believe in fairy tales. And then came 42-year-old Cordell Faulkner. Older, powerful, and endlessly charming, Cordell, known to most as KJ, was the kind of man who walked into a room and commanded attention. A self-made millionaire in Beverly Hills, with an empire of luxury car dealerships and high-end real estate, he was the definition of success. Women wanted him. Men wanted to be him. And when he set his sights on Zahara, he made sure she knew she was the only woman in the world who mattered. Their love story was straight out of a fantasy. The kind that made headlines, the kind people envied. He spoiled her in ways that didn't seem real: private jets, diamonds so big they caught the light in every photo, whispered promises in exotic locations. And Zahara? She soaked it all in. She called him her king, the man who proved that true love still existed. Together, they were #couple goals. Their engagement was a spectacle, because, of course, it had to be. A $500,000 ring, a sunset proposal on a private yacht, a sea of candles and roses that stretched for miles. Social media exploded. This was what love looked like. The perfect man and the perfect woman, a power couple built for the spotlight. And the wedding? A dream. A breathtaking Malibu estate, every inch dripping in gold and ivory, a guest list filled with celebrities and CEOs. Zahara, radiant in a custom gown worth more than most people's homes. Cordell, the devoted groom, gazing at her like she was the only thing that mattered. Millions watched from their screens, mesmerized. But what no one saw was the possessiveness lurking beneath Cordell's devotion. The way his love came with conditions. The subtle corrections, the moments where her independence became a threat. The whispers from those closest to her, the ones she ignored because, after all, Cordell loved her more than anyone ever had. Didn't he? Cordell Faulkner was the kind of man who made you feel like the center of the universe, until you weren't. He had a presence so commanding, so intoxicating, that when he spoke, people listened. When he loved, it was all-consuming. And when he was angry, well, that was a side of him few dared to face. To the outside world, he was the perfect man, generous, protective, devoted. But behind the grandeur and the carefully curated moments of perfection was something much darker. Cordell didn't just love Zahara. He owned her. At least, in his mind. It started off subtly, in ways that almost felt like affection. A casual suggestion about what she should wear, something more elegant, more befitting of a woman on his arm. A raised eyebrow when she laughed too long at another man's joke. A question disguised as a joke, why do you need anyone else when you have me? At first, Zahara didn't think much of it. Cordell adored her. He just wanted her all to himself. What woman wouldn't want a man who was so in love with her that he couldn't bear to share her attention? But adoration has a fine line. And Cordell was an expert at blurring it. Soon, it wasn't just about her outfits. He had opinions about who she spent time with, who she followed on social media, even what brand deals she accepted. When he spoke, it wasn't a suggestion, it was an expectation. And the moment she pushed back, that intoxicating charm turned to ice. Despite those growing red flags, Zahara was drawn to the power and privilege that came with being Cordell's fiancée. Zahara's world, once filled with lavish events and endless connections, started to shrink. Friends she used to confide in suddenly saw less of her. The ones who dared to question Cordell's influence found themselves pushed out completely. But there was one person Cordell could never erase from her life. Omari. Her childhood best friend. The one who had been there before the fame, before the money. The one who knew the real Zahara. And the one Cordell despised the most. Omari wasn't just a friend, he was a former lover. A part of Zahara's past that Cordell couldn't control. And that infuriated him. He hated the way she smiled when Omari's name popped up on her phone. The way her eyes softened when she spoke about him. The fact that, no matter how much Cordell demanded, Omari never fully disappeared. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, Cordell's jealousy turned venomous. He made it clear, Omari had no place in their lives. A husband is all a woman needs, he told Zahara one night, his voice smooth but sharp. If you really love me, you'll let him go. Zahara reassured him. Again and again. She told him he had nothing to worry about, that Omari was her past, and Cordell was her future. She laughed off his jealousy, brushed away his paranoia like it was a phase. But Cordell wasn't a man who let things go. Even as Zahara walked down the aisle in her breathtaking custom gown, promising forever, Cordell's mind wasn't on the vows. It was the fear gnawing at him, the fear that no matter how much he gave her, no matter how much he owned her, a part of Zahara would always belong to someone else. And that was unacceptable. Just hours after exchanging vows, Zahara and Cordell retreated to his Beverly Hills mansion, a multi-million-dollar fortress designed to be both luxurious and impenetrable. Every inch of the estate screamed wealth and exclusivity, but that night, it would become something far darker. It would become a cage. The wedding had been nothing short of perfection. The kind of event that shut down tabloids, that had millions of people glued to their screens, envying every detail. A star-studded guest list, a custom-designed gown dripping in diamonds, a love story broadcasted in real time. To the world, Zahara had it all. A powerful husband. A dream life. A fairy tale. But fairy tales have monsters, too. As the last of the champagne bubbled in crystal flutes and the final guests filtered out into the night, Zahara was still buzzing with excitement. Her feet ached from dancing, her head was light with alcohol, but she was happy. She had done it. She was finally Mrs. Faulkner. Cordell had been watching her all night. Every interaction, every laugh, every moment she spent in the orbit of another man. His grip on her waist had been just a little too firm, his kisses a little too possessive, his smiles a little too forced. He had wanted her phone earlier in the evening, just to keep things simple, he'd said. No distractions. But in the chaos of the reception, she had managed to keep it tucked in her clutch. Now, as she stepped into the master bathroom to freshen up, the device vibrated against the marble vanity. A single message illuminated the screen. It was from Omari. "I hope you're okay. If you need me, I'm here. Love you." Those 4 words sealed her fate. Cordell saw them the moment the phone lit up. His jaw clenched. His fingers curled into a fist so tight his knuckles turned white. Everything inside him ignited at once. A raging inferno of jealousy, betrayal, and something even darker. Love you. His wife. His woman. And this man had the audacity, on his wedding night, to remind her that he still existed? Zahara emerged from the bathroom, still glowing, still high on the magic of the night. She barely had time to register the look on Cordell's face before he shoved the phone into her hands, his voice like a blade. "What the fuck is this?" Zahara blinked, tipsy and caught off guard. Then, she laughed. A light, careless laugh, flipping her curls as she smirked. "Babe, you don't have to be jealous over everything, it was just a little checkup from my best friend." That was the last mistake she ever made. The laugh, the smirk, the way she brushed him off, it snapped something inside Cordell. In one swift motion, he lunged forward, slamming her against the bathroom wall. The back of her skull cracked against the cool marble as his hands closed around her throat. "You think this is funny?" he seethed, his grip tightening. Zahara's eyes widened, her hands clawing at his fingers as she gasped for air. She had seen his temper before, had felt his anger in cold, biting words, but never like this. Never with hands around her neck. She thrashed, nails raking across his face, drawing blood, but Cordell didn't flinch. His grip tightened. "You made me look like a fucking fool, Zahara." Her legs kicked wildly as she fought for breath, her vision blurring at the edges. And then, just as she thought she might black out, he released her. She collapsed onto the floor, coughing, gasping, her body trembling in shock. But it wasn't over. Before she could scramble away, Cordell grabbed her by the arm, dragging her into the bedroom. The silk sheets, the designer furniture, the perfectly arranged candles, it was all a cruel contrast to the violence unfolding inside those walls. He threw her onto the bed, towering over her, his face twisted in fury. "You're my wife now. You belong to me." Zahara tried to reason with him, tried to push him away, but he was too strong. When she screamed, he silenced her with the back of his hand. Her lips split open, the metallic taste of blood flooding her mouth. The night that should have been the happiest of her life had turned into a nightmare. And the worst was yet to come. Cordell didn't stop at beating her. He wanted to destroy her. To erase her. To make sure no trace of her defiance, no remnant of her beauty, no sign of her existence remained. The rage inside him was uncontrollable, a wildfire consuming every rational thought. He stormed out of the bedroom, his heart pounding, his hands shaking with adrenaline. The house was eerily silent, save for the sound of his own ragged breathing. He moved through the gleaming kitchen, past the marble countertops, past the expensive appliances, until his eyes landed on the set of knives mounted on the wall. His fingers curled around the handle of an 8-inch Japanese steel knife. Razor sharp. Precision crafted. The kind of blade that could cut through anything. By the time he returned to the bedroom, Zahara was barely conscious. Her body was broken, her breath shallow, her limbs trembling as she struggled to crawl off the bed. Her hand reached weakly toward the nightstand, as if searching for something, her phone. A weapon. A miracle. She never got the chance. The first stab entered her abdomen with a sickening SHLCK. A sharp gasp escaped her lips, her body jolting in agony. But the walls of the mansion, thick, soundproof, designed to keep the outside world from ever intruding, swallowed her screams. Cordell didn't hesitate. He pulled the blade out and drove it in again. And again. And again. Blood sprayed across the silk sheets, pooling beneath her body, dripping onto the pristine Persian rugs that had cost more than some people's homes. Zahara's hands clutched at the wounds instinctively, her fingers slick with her own blood, her lips forming silent pleas. But Cordell didn't see his wife anymore. He saw a betrayal, a violation, a woman who had mocked him. And he wasn't done yet. The butchering was methodical. Calculated. The blade moved with precision, slicing through flesh, muscle, bone. Cordell wasn't just killing Zahara, he was disassembling her. He severed her limbs one by one, taking his time with each cut. The once perfect bride, the woman who had stood in front of millions in her designer gown just hours earlier, was now reduced to nothing more than scattered pieces of flesh and bone. The smell of blood was thick in the air, mixing with the faint scent of Zahara's wedding perfume. And then, silence. For hours, Cordell sat in the carnage, his chest rising and falling with deep, steady breaths. He stared at what was left of Zahara, his mind eerily calm. The initial rage had faded, replaced by something else, an eerie satisfaction. He took a slow sip of whiskey, the ice clinking against the glass, his fingers still stained red. It wasn't until the alcohol burned down his throat that reality began to sink in.
Zahara was gone. There was no undoing what he had done. No coming back from this. Panic set in, but only briefly. Cordell had always been a man who prided himself on control. He wouldn't let this spiral. He wouldn't allow himself to lose. He needed a plan. Moving with calculated precision, he wrapped her remains in black garbage bags, sealing them tight. But even as he worked, the blood continued to seep into the expensive floorboards, an unforgiving stain that no amount of scrubbing would erase. He thought fast. The acid. Out in the garage, Cordell had an arsenal of industrial-grade cleaners, supplies meant for deep sanitation, for stripping away grime, for erasing any trace of a mess. He dragged the bags out, sweat dripping from his forehead, his mind racing. He poured the acid over portions of Zahara's body, watching as the chemical reaction began to eat away at flesh. But it wasn't working fast enough. And time was slipping away. The mansion, his fortress, was suddenly a crime scene. And the clock was ticking. Zahara Monet-Alexander was a woman who lived for the spotlight. Every morning, she greeted her millions of followers with perfectly curated snapshots of her life, brunches at five-star restaurants, diamond-studded vacations, handwritten love notes from her doting husband. But as the hours turned into days and her once active social media fell silent, an unsettling worry began to take root. At first, her fans assumed she was basking in post-wedding bliss, tucked away in some remote paradise with Cordell. But her closest friends knew better. Zahara was never this quiet. She lived online, breathing in likes and exhaling engagement. She would never just disappear. Her mother, Simone Monet, had spent years learning the rhythms of her daughter's life, her calls, her habits, her subtle shifts in energy. And something felt off. Calls went unanswered, texts were left unread, and that gut-wrenching instinct, the one only a mother knows, told her something was wrong. By the second day, Simone couldn't ignore the gnawing dread. She called Cordell directly, her voice sharp with worry. "Where is Zahara?" Cordell's response was smooth, too smooth. "She left, Simone. We had a little argument, and she needed space. You know how she is." But that was the thing, Simone did know how Zahara was. And her daughter wouldn't just walk away from her new husband without a word. So, she called the police. The Beverly Hills mansion stood cold and imposing when authorities arrived, its sprawling gates and high-tech security cameras making it feel more like a fortress than a home. Cordell greeted them with an air of forced calm, dressed in pressed designer loungewear, his demeanor controlled. He repeated his story with the ease of a practiced liar. "She left," he insisted. "She was upset. I told her to take some time if she needed it. But something was off." The officers noticed the tension in his jaw, the stiffness in his posture. They noticed the way his eyes flicked toward the house, as if willing them to stay outside. When they asked to come in, he hesitated for just a moment too long. That hesitation cost him everything. The first thing that hit them when they stepped inside was the smell. It clung to the air like a thick, putrid fog, metallic, sour, unmistakable. The scent of death. Their eyes followed the dark stains on the white marble floor. Not immediately visible, but there. A trail, leading somewhere. Cordell tried to block their path, his voice suddenly tight. "There's nothing in there. I already told you," she left. But the police weren't listening anymore. They followed the smell down a hallway, through the sleek modern kitchen, and toward the wine cellar. The door was slightly ajar. And inside, standing in the dim light, was Cordell Faulkner. His hands, still stained with blood, twitched at his sides. He didn't panic. Wasn't crying. Wasn't scrambling for an escape. He just stood there, pacing, muttering under his breath. The officers' flashlights swept the room. The first thing they saw was the garbage bags. Lined up in the corner like discarded waste, oozing dark liquid onto the floor. The second thing they saw was the half-dissolved remains in a plastic tub of industrial-grade acid. A grotesque attempt to erase what he had done. And Cordell? He barely reacted. When they grabbed him, when they forced him to the ground, when they read him his rights, he barely flinched. In the interrogation room, he was eerily silent at first, his bloodshot eyes fixated on the table. Then, finally, he spoke. "She betrayed me," he muttered, more to himself than to the detectives. The officers exchanged glances. "How did she betray you, Cordell?" His jaw clenched. His fingers curled into fists. His voice dropped to a whisper. "She mocked me." Outside, the world was already unraveling. The news had broken. The perfect love story was over. And Cordell Faulkner was seen as the sweet groom anymore. He was a monster. The world had fallen in love with Zahara Monet-Alexander. Her life had been a carefully curated dream, one that millions envied, flawless beauty, a glamorous career, and a beautiful marriage to one of the most powerful men in Los Angeles. But now, that dream had curdled into something grotesque, something unthinkable. Her name was no longer trending for lavish vacations and designer gowns. Instead, it was plastered across every news outlet, paired with words like butchered, dismembered, erased. The photographs that once captured her laughing in the glow of a sunset were replaced with crime scene images, bags of flesh, acid-eaten remains, pools of blood soaking into Persian rugs. The man who once claimed to love her sat in a cold cell, stripped of his tailored suits, his curated image, his charm. Cordell Faulkner, the businessman, the billionaire, the golden boy, was now a murderer. When the trial began, the courtroom was packed. Seats filled with reporters, influencers, and former fans who had once swooned over their wedding pictures. The prosecution wasted no time tearing apart the illusion Cordell had so carefully crafted. They painted him as a controlling, possessive monster, a man who didn't love Zahara, but owned her. A man who, the moment she defied him, decided she was no longer worthy of life. They described the brutality of the crime in unflinching detail. The soundproof walls that swallowed her screams. The knife that carved through flesh and bone with precision. The hours he spent sitting with her remains, sipping whiskey as if he hadn't just slaughtered his wife. And then there was the text message. "I hope you're okay. If you need me, I'm here. Love you." It was displayed on the courtroom screens, those few words haunting the silence like a ghost. The final spark that ignited Cordell's fury. The moment that sealed Zahara's fate. Cordell's defense team tried to spin the story. They argued he wasn't a monster, just a man pushed to the edge by overwhelming emotions. They described a love that had been too intense, too passionate, too consuming. They said Zahara had betrayed him, humiliated him, and in a moment of uncontrollable rage, he snapped. But the jury wasn't buying it. They saw through the carefully constructed narratives, the crocodile tears, the desperate attempts to justify the unjustifiable. They saw the photographs. The evidence. The garbage bags. They deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned, the room was silent, a heavy stillness hanging over the crowd. Zahara's mother sat in the front row, clutching a picture of her daughter, her fingers trembling. Guilty. The word echoed through the courtroom. Cordell didn't react. No tears, no outbursts, no remorse. Just a tightening of the jaw, a flicker of something in his eyes, something dark, something still dangerous. The judge wasted no time. Life in prison. No parole. No second chances. Cordell Faulkner, once a man who had the world at his feet, was led away in shackles, his designer lifestyle reduced to an orange jumpsuit and a concrete cell. Outside the courthouse, the debates raged on. Some called him a monster. Others whispered about Zahara's relationship with Omari, about the text message, about whether Cordell had been pushed to the brink. Social media was a battlefield of opinions, arguments, and conspiracy theories. But none of it mattered. Zahara was gone. Her dream life, her fairy tale romance, her perfect Instagram feed, it had all ended in blood and silence. And Cordell, the man who had vowed to love and protect her, would spend the rest of his days locked away, haunted by the woman he tried to erase. Love is supposed to be safe. It's supposed to lift, to nurture, to protect. But when love is twisted by control, by obsession, by unchecked rage, it becomes something else entirely, something lethal. Zahara Monet-Alexander was a woman who had everything, yet in the end, she had no way out. She was trapped in a love that suffocated her, a marriage that was doomed before the vows were even spoken. And when she made the fatal mistake of underestimating Cordell Faulkner's darkness, she paid the ultimate price. This case is more than just another headline, more than just another gruesome crime. It is a reminder, a warning. The signs were there, hidden beneath the glitz, buried under the picture-perfect moments. The jealousy that burned too hot. The control that disguised itself as love. The quiet, creeping fear that Zahara must have felt in those final moments when she realized there was no escape. Could she have saved herself if she had seen it sooner? If she had listened to the whispers of doubt in the back of her mind? How do any of us recognize when love has turned into something dangerous? These are the questions we're left with, the questions that linger long after the trial has ended and the media moves on. Because stories like Zahara's don't just end. They echo. They serve as a dark testament to the reality that behind closed doors, fairy tales can become nightmares. If this story shocked you, if it made you question the nature of love and control, like and subscribe. Because the truth is always more terrifying than fiction. And sometimes, the real monsters aren't the ones lurking in the shadows, they're the ones who say, "I love you."